Let's talk about testosterone, a cyclic androgen steroid with a molecular weight of 288.4 grams per mole and two functional groups, one ketone and one hydroxyl. The question being, does testosterone cause male violence? Now we have to admit to ourselves first that any questions of this hormone causing violence is subject to the filter of misandry in Western society. I mean, we can ask ourselves honestly, whether or not testosterone causes violence in men, but the question of whether or not estrogen or prolactin or any other female estrogen causes women to abuse and even kill their own children must be framed in the standard female as victim model, a la postpartum depression and the woman being compelled to kill as a result of some hormonal imbalance. Conversely, when addressing whether or not testosterone has any effect on men who kill women, for example, the man must be displayed as co-conspirator to his androgen secretion. But nonetheless, we ask the question, does testosterone cause men to be violent? If we examine evidence claiming that lesbian relationships are the ones most prone to domestic violence, we must then ask ourselves why relationships of the exclusively sapphic variety produce more violence than ones which are comprised of half or even 100% men, and thus testosterone in terms of hormonal makeup. If in fact testosterone causes violence, we would clearly expect to see the most violence in homosexual male relationships. Now, there are conflicting reports on whether or not lesbians have higher levels of testosterone than heterosexual women, but in either case, it simply isn't likely that they produce the hormone in anywhere near the amount that men do, as men produce 10 to 20 times as much as the hormone as women do. Even still, we should ask ourselves why it's so important in the first place to stigmatize and correlate testosterone with violence. The reason being that it is integral for a society that both needs and hates its need of men to affix violence with something innate in the male makeup. It's off limits, of course, to propose that testosterone may be responsible for human brilliance and innovation. One can propose innate male violence, but never innate male brilliance for any reason, hormonal or otherwise. You see, feminist theory highlights only one possible correlation between men and testosterone, that is, one of an intrinsic predisposition to violence. All beneficial possible correlations, including greater powers of analytical thought, are biased speculations arising from patriarchy. And patriarchy is male, and the male is testosterone, and testosterone, remember, is violence. Now, for the record, my personal opinion is that estrogens or even androgens are not enough to explain away the general behavior of men and women, and environmental factors are without a doubt at play here. But if testosterone causes violence in men, and numerous studies show that men with higher levels of testosterone are more likely to reproduce, then are women, who are of course the selectors in human breeding, more likely to select for a group of men that are more likely to commit violence? Perhaps estrogen then causes violence in its own way via sexual selection. If sex hormones are contributing factors towards violence, their contributions are made at the very least in duality with one another. You see, in ancient Rome, women would purchase gladiator sweat to be used as an aphrodisiac. Now, why would the sweat of men whose sole purpose was to kill other men for the purposes of entertainment provide sexual stimulation to Roman women? If we are to assume that testosterone induces violence in men, then we are also to assume that estrogen induces hybristophilia in women. Hybristophilia being defined as any paraphilia involving being sexually aroused or attracted to people who have committed acts of gruesome crime and violence. Again, this isn't what I believe. I'm merely following the flawed logic of feminist theory that states that the presence of testosterone and any amount of violence signifies an indisputable correlation between the two. See, many factors that cause male violence are the same ones that ensure women are never exposed to a situation in which they will have to engage in violent crime. If men have traditionally been required by society to be providers and protectors, then women will have by definition benefited from cultural norms that cushion them from situations that cause violence. It's a well-known fact that poverty causes violence. So if men are providing women with provision, and women aren't providing it back to men, we can reasonably conclude that women are less likely to commit crime due to poverty. The opposite also holds true for men. If men are providing protection from danger, and women aren't providing it to men, well then it stands to reason that most women being exposed to less danger than men will have less reason to mitigate that danger with the most effective deterrent of danger, which is of course the threat of reciprocal violence. You see, it is flawed feminist thinking that creates these misconceptions of men and their innate makeup, whether it be physical or hormonal or chemical or what have you. You won't ever hear it in a women's studies curriculum. But in order to understand gender more thoroughly, we must move away from this propensity to blame men for all the ills and evils of the world. That's all I have to say for now, but more to come.